Right.
Yes,
And I'll make a
fantastic.
note stock for us and share that in a second.
Okay.
So sorry for that interruption.
No worries. So I did get Lauren's answer. And Tahera, I know, if you want to go first, I know you do work in the Cascadia region, but specifically if there's any food systems related stuff going on over
Yeah, I think I would like to share a little bit briefly about the Columbia Gorge and the work that we're doing there with Culture Seed, which is a educational nonprofit. We do have a learning garden there, which is both a learning garden for people to learn community gardening together, but also to learn about food systems and learn about the situation that we're in and the types of transitional potentials. So there's permaculture, but also food production oriented space there. It's not a huge garden, so it's more of a demonstration space. And then in the region, there's a pretty powerful presence of local food awareness and with Gorge Grown. And within that, there's emerged a coalition, a food security coalition in the Columbia Gorge, which Christina has been part of supporting as well. And so part of the vision there is to create a food systems map that would be a kind of a template. It would kind of be usable by any area, and it would be able to map the network of food suppliers and that side of things, as well as the flows within the map. So it's a relatively complex project in terms of what we would love to be able to potentially map that way. And then those projects are all centered around, there is some fundraising going on for that larger food systems map, which connects into the call that I hosted with the Holo Ecosystems Map channel regular meeting, and then some of the other work that we got to see that Leslie is doing with the other Kumu maps. So lots of these things I see connecting together around, and I see the food systems needing to be mapped as part of the bigger equal conversation of food, water, waste, energy, all of the basic needs that we have that we want to be able to provide for in a regenerative way. So I'm specifically interested in regenerative mapping of those systems, not just like mapping what's already there or mapping the flows of food that are happening currently, and more so wanting to map those that are aligned with the regenerative trajectory. So that I'll just stop at that bit.
Yep. Ben, did you want to say a little bit about food solutions and any other food systems that you're participating in or belong to?
Sure. Yeah, so there's an initiative called Food Solutions New England that I'm part of the process team for. So we're kind of, it's a circle that advises the core I don't know if they're full-time leadership, but there's a staff. It's based on the collective impact model that's been popularized through the Stanford Social Innovation Review for how to do large-scale collaboration, multi-organization collaboration. So there's a network of about 30 organizations that are active in the New England area on a whole set of food issues, from family farms to seafood to farmland preservation to migrant justice issues, that are really working at the intersection or have centered social justice as a key to transforming the food system to be one that is more equitable and regionally based. There's a vision for 50% of New England's food to be produced within the region by 2060, 50 by 60. That was developed. The initiative is about 5 or 6 years old. I've been a part of it just for the past year. They do a racial equity challenge. They're working on a state of the New England food systems kind of dashboard set of metrics. They are working on a food policy guide and probably partnering with the HEAL initiative. HEAL stands for something, and they've developed a whole sort of policy platform around food that looks super awesome. So we're just talking about endorsing that now. There is a new narrative for the food system that is being developed in collaboration with some outside consultants. And I might be leaving off one of the other initiatives. I think those are the main ones. The racial equity. There's a leadership training institute also that's part of it. And they have quarterly meetings of the network team, which is leaders from these different organizations, about 30 of them, our process team meets monthly to kind of support the core backbone team that meets probably more frequently than that. And they're based out of the University of New Hampshire and pretty well funded for one of these things.
Great. And so, yeah, I live in New York, and there is the Hudson River Valley, which is really the growing region closest to our city, and then has edges with New England and tri-state. And really what's been my impetus for having these discussions and seeing what's working out there and how do you go about designing and developing something is because we've got the Hudson River Valley is it's a river that's still got water. We're a very thriving producing region, but we definitely have room to be integrated. And this is I've spoken to different farmers who do permaculture stuff and a bit more interested in the systemic stuff as well, biodynamic farmers as well, and then just other folks in the food systems. And everybody says, well, it's nascent, we've got potential, but doesn't quite come together, and that there is opportunity and potential here. And I had recently done a regenerative practitioner course with Regenesis, which I felt was a really good framework and set of methodology for how to do regenerative design intentionally. And so that put another lens on me, is to look at my own food system and see how we could be a lot more collaborative, sure, but really starting to bring those benefits of the interrelationships in a system. And how do you actually intentionally design or develop that? And then we've got, what's interesting is we've got this very large urban area of New York City, and we're not very well connected with our food producing region beyond CSAs and certain chefs bringing in the foods, but it's still at a very small and privileged level that folks are really eating from Hudson River Valley. So, and as an example, in our city, in the Bronx, where the entire food distribution takes place from, where that distribution center sits is considered a food desert. So just to give you a bit of a context setting, so my interest is to really look at other examples, and also what are some of the frameworks, methodologies. And I know, Ben, you mentioned collective impact, which I would love to, if we can include something on that in the resources. But one, there are folks interested, how do you really bring them together? Because one, during the spring, summer season, farmers are super busy. That's why the local producers are not somebody who ends up getting a lot of, impact investment or grants and stuff like that, unless they're pretty large. So in the interest of furthering local food systems, smaller food producers, and connecting equally consumers who are not super large, individuals, etc., what are some of the things we get to think about? So and I'm really excited that we've got food solutions, and I'd love to see how that develops. But I guess what I'm interested in getting to hear a bit more from both of you, Gail and Ben, is was this something that just organically evolved, or was there an intentional effort? And if it was intentional, sort of just a little bit about what that process looked like. And Lauren, if you have any experience in that too, yeah, please. Not to,
Great. So I think if I'm kind of hearing correctly, the part about, is it intentional or how it's coming together, I think the process of tracking it as emergence, but also understanding that people are, looking to do the design work. Mostly as I've seen some other situations, like in the Appalachia region, there was one of these food system projects where they did a pretty comprehensive design, also focused around social justice orientation, and they mapped a whole lot of things out, and they did a pretty good process around it, and it's a good example. And then the data, though, is not doesn't automatically update, or it doesn't stay live. So what they created was more of like a snapshot than an actual functional space. And so I don't really know how that project tracked along. And then for myself, I guess I would say that I am doing it more from design because of just even how I'm talking about it. I'm looking at other examples and looking to do that. Yet I believe that the people that I'm meeting up with from the other side a lot, that I'm finding, and this is that part about, find the others, make the connections, the permaculture as relationships, to find all the other folks who are doing that food production or local production of food in those kinds of ways, and then connecting them together, and in some cases convincing them of the relationship, or convincing the way that can happen, and then getting the tools and resources across to different folks in that way, whether it's the strategies for permaculture. And I do wish that India were on the call as well, because they're doing some really great work. That some of the first I've heard of examples where, having that cooperative where they're supplying food from people who are doing permaculture oriented production and land preservation and education, and then connecting that to the food systems approach, which is very much something I would love to apply, with some of the land base that we have in the gorge. And we haven't done that yet. So I guess my answer is a lot around the idea of getting all the examples that people are doing intervisible, to each other, so that those tools can happen that way. And it seems like the culture part of it, quickly, one more piece about that with the gorge, is that it seems like there's a ripeness for local identity in that region, and that might be part of the factor of, like, people are ready to be bioregionally aware in that space. And I think that helps them have that type of orientation towards sovereignty, and localization. So.
And was it the producers and those guys, was it just a natural evolution from a food cooperative that existed, or who? So one of the other things I've been really thinking about is everybody needs to be involved, and ownership would be spread across, but where the actual actions really start rolling off from, to start thinking of food system versus, we're connected food producers or connected, right? In the case of the gorge, was there anything, was it coming from the producers itself, or?
Yes, the Food Security Coalition in this case, I think it really did emerge from the producers but in that regard too, and probably Gorge Grown would be a good one of those kind of case study type examples of, how did that come up? And I would have to, kind of study up just a little bit to be able to present on the history of it. But I do know that the link that I just dropped does have a little bit of where the focus is, and their focus is a bit around, addressing hunger. But there are some good resources a bit around how they formed, and that the Gorge Grown Food Network came out of Gorge Grown, and there's also a Gorge owned business organization as well, where there's the effort to localize that way. But there's a food resources map and the partner map for the coalition. So they've definitely had some good allies in and connection to Portland. Not so much with the food distribution. That side of things is another place where my learning curve is. I wish I were able to represent a little more clearly, because I know there are other projects that are more centered around Portland in terms of food being produced close to the city and within the city. In fact, there are some great permaculture examples in Portland. I should mention that. Folks doing food production inside the city. And of course, the scaling factor, is one of the more complex pieces, with with meeting needs or what the food needs are. And that's actually one of the pressures for people to, with their businesses, at where they have to scale to in order to keep their business or to keep the growth of it. It's like the idea of keeping food on the shelf, and the idea, so that whole model has to change. And that's why I think India's project is also another one where if you have a space where what's available that's being produced seasonally, because that's what is available, is there, and people have access to that in the ways that it's networked, it's different than, the idea that here are these shelves that have to be filled with these products, and there's something wrong if it's not full of that product. It might be actually, there's nothing wrong with that. That product's not available at this time of year because, there's seasonality, and so those types of like educated consumer and side, and then both obviously to the consumer producer, where people are at least starting to produce some of their own food or more of their own food, or participating at the CSAs that they're involved in, or going to the farms that are producing the food, things that are on those education tracks too.
Do you remember the question, Ben?
How the initiative developed? Was it, was it sort of carefully planned and designed in advance, or I guess was it more emergent, or that?
Yes.
That question? And Kiala, I didn't catch the name, just for the notes, and if somebody else wants to help take some notes in here, that would be awesome.
It was Columbia Gorge, but I have taken some
What's
notes.
the full title? You've got some notes on the side? Awesome. But I want to get it in, Gorge Grown. That's the initiative you're working on with Christina, or the other one you mentioned?
That's the one that I'm mentioning that's part of the region. We're working with, one of the main issues that I'm doing, I guess, Culture Seed can be named in the notes, because Culture Seed is working on supporting some of the social integration side of this too, and the educational side. So those are the parts where we're looking to bring in as well. But so much of it for me is about finding all the other people who are already doing similar work and convincing them to work together and collaborate.
There isn't a name for that working together and collaborating thing yet.
Culture Seed. I think right now there's not exactly a name for that, I guess, other than that there's the Culture Seed Learning Garden, and the Culture Seed, and then there's also Genie. So there's Genie and the Food Systems Map project. I guess that could be named as well. That way.
Is that part of the Food Security Coalition, or is that separate, the Genie stuff?
That's separate. So so Gorge Grown is a coalition group, and then Genie is the mapping team. Gorge Genie is the local mapping team, and then the food security projects or food security mapping thing is more of a distributed piece, where we have folks in Atlanta and folks in different regions, and anyone else who's also mapping food. We're just wanting to consider that as a cross-organizational, information sharing sort of a project, where that will go next. So and that's a good indication that having a name for it, having a more of a project framing is useful as far as what the next steps are. So but it also emerges from collaboration, so this space is good for that.
I would say that speaks to different kinds of approaches to how one might serve the need for regional organizing and systems change. So one is where there's some kind of an initiative with a name that's linking together all of these different organizations. But I don't think that's the only way one could operate. Collective impact was designed as a model specifically to be that sort of central hub. And they have so they use that kind of language, or the lead team is called the backbone organization. So it's a very hierarchical model, although what the innovation, if you will, with the collective impact approach that got everybody's attention when it first came out, I don't know, 8 years ago or so, 7, something like that, was that the typical pattern is, there's 12 organizations that all see that they ought to collaborate on something, right? And typically the biggest organization winds up taking the lead coordinating role because they're just the biggest player and they've got the resources and stuff. And the collective impact folks said, that really doesn't work very well. They have conflicts of interest, and that role is the coordinating role is a distinct role from the role that each organization is going to play in the partnership. So you need this separate thing called the backbone organization, and it should be funded and well-resourced and recognized, and its job is to help the whole system to communicate better, to decide on its metrics, to set milestones, to do a lot of fairly traditional strategic planning type things. So it's taking a very traditional strategic planning approach and adding this new sort of thing in the center of it that is not supposed to be in charge of it. It's supposed to be facilitating the whole group, to do its collaborative work. It's a very top-heavy model as a result. It requires a lot of resources. It means that there is this entity that has its own name that in some ways is competing for attention and resources with the partners that are doing the actual work. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that model and that example. And that's a good way that, looking at the gorge, it hasn't been appropriate to show up that way because of all of the people who are already existing players and the tendency for NGOs to feel like it's competitive, like competing for funding, competing for attention or whatever. So the process of showing up and helping to be that kind of more interstitial process. But great to name that one. And if you want to share a best link on collective impact, if you have any favorite links around collective impact.
I did in the chat, and it's also going to be in the notes here. It's in the notes here too.
I don't see it in the chat, but okay. And thank you.
Well, it's there.
Okay.
Lauren saw it, so I know it was there. So that's.
Sorry, Ben, you can answer the question, but you guys have just. I was nodding furtively because that's how I see the Hudson River Valley would need to get organized. That's kind of what the conversations I'm having with some of the folks in Hudson River Valley, because there are those brighter ones that have been able to put their head above just the production, going, yeah, we know we're part of something big, but we don't know, and that bias and the perspective, even if you're not biased, the perception would be that way. And
right.
So
and I think the other thing, if you've ever tried to create multi-organizational collaboration, I mean, the collective impact people recognize it's hard and something was missing. Notes link, yeah. And so they came up with one answer, but I think, in the collaboratory, we've done our own versions of different things, and there's this basic tension around the fact that each organization has got its own coherence and its own work. And if you're saying to them, you've got to find something that overlaps with these 12 other folks and collectively put everything into the center, that's enormously complex and time-consuming and doesn't always make sense. So if you look at the things that Food Solutions New England is doing, I think they're all, valid initiatives, but it's years in the making. I mean, first they did a whole systems map project to try to identify where the leverage points were, and then they identify these 4 things, and then they hired a consultant to work on the narrative, and so I'm excited to be a part of it, and stuff takes time, so it'll be interesting to see where it all ends up. But I also sense that there's a whole other way of working that doesn't require each organization to kind of set aside or merge its stuff with everybody else's as part of this third thing in the middle, but that somehow is looking for more lightweight, coordinating, collaborating, cooperating possibilities where each, somebody used the word interstitial, right? You're just somehow playing in the spaces around all this stuff as if it's a pre-existing ecosystem and not trying to create some new thing that layers on top of it. That's a thing. It's more like, it's more of a doing than a single container. So I haven't seen anybody name that approach really well. I mean, it's sort of like network weaving, I guess, might be the closest to it, but it's something more than that, because it's not just about networks, but it's some of what that whole body of work looks at in terms of where you can create value in a networked kind of a space. I I think there's more that I could say. I am going to have to bow out though pretty soon, like now-ish. But if you
Yeah.
have any quick questions on that.
So so Food Solutions New England is funded by multiple parties?
It's grant funded by a few different foundations, plus the University of New Hampshire may be at least doing some in-kind stuff with staff time and offices and stuff like that.
Okay, but somebody said, hey, there's this great thing called collective impact, and let's start putting ourselves around it, kind of a thing.
I think yes. So you had a consulting firm, the Interaction Institute for Social Change, IISC, Curtis Ogden, in the lead of that, and he became part of the core anchor team along with the Office of Sustainability at University of New Hampshire, Tom Kelly. I don't know the full history, I wasn't there, but I think the two of them kind of got together and said, hey, let's do a collective impact thing on the food system in New England. And so it was designed that way from that model, and they approached funders because the model is sexy right now. Funders learned about this. Oh, we finally saw multi-organization collaboration. Now we can throw money at it, So
that's what I was going to say. That's what when you do have a thing, then because one of the things is when investors don't see something traditional, they are not able to wrap their heads around it. It seems too risky. You don't know what you're funding, whether it will be around or not. So
definitely true. Yeah. There was one other thing I was going to say, but it slipped my mind. I don't know. It was something about the origins of it. No, I don't know. Oh, yeah. So this might be relevant. One of the things, I mean, part of that origin story means, New England got landed as the frame for various reasons. But I think it's been a problematic frame in many ways. It's a colonial term, literally. It's not a bioregion particularly. It's more culturally defined to some degree, again with through colonialism, not indigenous culture. You've got lots of different ecosystems and needs. You've got two big urban areas and a lot of other urban areas, and then a lot of rural stuff. So I like the Hudson River Valley is a bioregion, and you got New York City at the end of it, and there's something really coherent about that I don't think exists with New England in the same way. It's also it's kind of too big and too small. I don't know. It's big. It's about the size of the state of Washington of Oregon, so it's not enormous by U.S. standards. But one way to look at it is just it's small enough that you can go to a central point and meet in person and do a day trip or an overnight trip. I think that's about. Anyways, it's just an interesting question of what regional scale really has high leverage, particularly when you're talking about food, which you want to be quite local to a large degree. I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
If I can interject really quickly on that one, just to put the seed here, because one of the conversations that I brought into the GENA, so the Global Eco Village Network, and then the Global Eco Village Network North America, what I brought into that conversation is to then move down into the bioregional perspective. And what I started to discover, like you're describing, is that you have cultural maps and layers of cultural maps as well as layers of kind of more bioregional maps. And then quickly,
the definition of bioregional includes culture.
Well, yeah, and what I yeah, well, okay, and so the distinction that I'm describing is geographic bioregional, cultural bioregional. I think there is nuance there that's worth not just piling together, but it's both. And I'm into whole systems, so I can go there. But the main thing is that there's also the pre-existing culture. And that was one of the most heavy layers of the map, which is looking at who were the people who were here before and how have we made peace with that? How has that been acknowledged? Like, how well has that been acknowledged? Because in some areas that's more acknowledged than others. And so as we were putting together this process, and I'm working, Ben had to go. He did say he had to go.
Yeah.
But that process around making peace with the past in the place, and so that because sometimes there is a sort of colonial culture is the or resistant or the layers around civil war in the US, and I know every region has its deeper history, so being able to have that be one of the aspects of the work we're doing to create healing around the history of a place.
Yeah. And we have a great, so when I look at the different aspects that are represented in the Hudson River Valley, one of the things, and it was interesting that both you and Ben spoke of social justice being one of the key drivers too, or at least I heard social justice when both were talking about the food systems. We have soul fire farms. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's a woman called, and I think they might have actually gotten the land through some sort of trust or through some sort of program. But the entire premise of Soul Fire Farm is to help people of color, but primarily natives and Black folks, to heal through the trauma that was, and especially because so much of it was through the land, and that's how it was inflicted. That was the tool, and so to heal through the land. So it's when there is programming that's very much front and center, along with and we'll also get skills on how to farm and things like that. So it would be, and now the thing is, it's so rare, and Leah is only there. That farm is the only one around a whole bunch of farms that are not owned by people of color at all, because Hudson River Valley is still pretty. The landowners are still pretty. It's mostly white, and so now Leah's been asked to consult in a lot of different. We have something called Grow NYC in New York and other such organizations to help figure out how to bring in more diversity, but it's definitely not. I mean, yeah, I didn't hear in Food Solutions or even in Hudson River Valley how some of our past with Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee, like any of those guys, Mohawks and stuff. When that's not, I've not seen it in any of our food system discussions.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously in the Pacific Northwest, the traditional food system includes the salmon, and there's a lot of ways of understanding like what to learn about the traditional food system of the place, if it's intact at all or not, or how. And I mean, but this healing part around whoever's coming and wherever things are going, to me feels like it relates to this continuum of having people be able to feel welcome where they are, to the and there's a lot of people who are not feeling entirely welcome where they are, obviously, historically, and so I feel like we do bump into the need for healing around that, and then creating the patterns through which that process can be supported. These examples are powerful to have from other areas too, and I think connecting people up feels important.
Yeah, and in contrast, I wanted to, by the way, Lauren, do you have anything, I wanted to acknowledge that you're here, and if you have any
No, I'm totally useless. I'm totally useless in this conversation. I know I'm not impressing anyone with my knowledge, but no. I just want to say, Kella, I'm also interested in how you cross-pollinate in distributed networks. And I actually do not know the answer, but that's kind of my quest to find out. So if you find out anything, please let me know.
Great. Well, I mean, what I would say about that already, I like that you used a biological reference, like the biophilic, biomimetic example of cross-pollinating, because I think that is really good. I think that also sharing seeds is another one. So as far as like distributed networks, it's also similar to the type of awareness of compatible bioregions, where these things will grow here as well, that sort of thing. There's a lot around permaculture food systems with that. There's another link I want to drop in around the climate preparedness in permaculture design, which I was mentioning, and Angie Millison, a friend and collaborator and teacher of mine, is producing that, and it has an open textbook as well. So I'll put the link for both. But the course itself is run, through the university that he's at. But back to you.
Did these chat sessions? I don't know how to record a chat session either. So since you're the host, is that something you could do, Kayla?
Oh yeah, and so what happens is that we export the chat. At the end, you can do it with that the more button, and it will do save chat. And then let's see.
See, I don't have those options. I think it's because I am in where I am.
Okay, so because you're on the tablet, yeah. So I'll do that part, and I'll post those in the notes. And then I just want to make sure that I get that climate permaculture piece. But Lauren, I also would love to follow up on the conversation about cross-pollinating and distributed networks, because that is exactly what I'm doing, and it's why I'm not necessarily like what Ben was saying. Like, is there a name for that? Is there a name for that project that you're doing? And in a way, like, I'm wanting to keep it more agile than having to try and set it up that way. Like, and I appreciated the example with collective impact and some of the other ways of looking at strategy around how to distribute information, how to share knowledge and capacity across different organizations, and have that kind of exponential impact through that process. So
yeah, well, I'm trying to figure it out, because I think the field of collective intelligence is so new, and there's not a lot of info that I found yet.
Now, have you guys heard of Capital Institute by John Fullerton? He has created a think tank specifically around economic models that work for regenerative communities, and has created a regenerative hub. I'm so rubbish with being able to actually type and chat and put the resource name in there, but
yeah, it's harder.
it's just called Capital Institute. You'll find it. I'll just put the name so that. And he's doing exactly that. And what's interesting to me too, Kayla, is getting an understanding of how to fund such efforts, right? Because nobody owns it, and this understanding of, oh, we're investing in something in this cross-pollination process that's important. It's a hard one to get. So are you just doing it on your own accord, or is it getting supported and funded in some way?
I'm for myself, I'm seeking to get more funding to be able to move these projects forward more, and that's the framing that I'm needing to take, because I'm pushing myself to keep doing. I'm overstretched around that. I think that like these projects need more funding to be able to happen, and so having them not be, it's a similar scenario where like coordinating is a very important function, and it should be something that is compensated, not something that is expected to be filled in. There's a lot of the ways that in the inequities in the current system, where certain things are rewarded, and then lots of other things that are absolutely important and vital functions are not being funded.
Yeah. So
how do we change that? Like, even just at this most basic level, because we need to be able to do that. And I think from one of the things that I'm excited about with this project of TRCC and the movement strategy dialogues is that it is connecting people up, that we are able to follow these threads through. And I would say, especially in terms of the action steps, that is being able to say, take something forward in a next way. And, and like, how can we just keep kind of moving things forward, at least with the co-inspiration across the different spaces, and then the possibilities for collaboratively funding any of the work that we're doing that is a distributed solution, because that's the direction that I'm seeing as far as like, what is the way that we could take this and make, really valuable resources and information that we can distribute to all these projects, and then, but in particular, support them locally as well. So there's that local to global pattern that we're working.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that it suffers from is it just doesn't have the strong branding that way, right? Like, again, traditional investors or funders or foundations can't wrap their head around this is an important role, unless the system itself sort of supports and elevates this and then funds it. And I'm interested in seeing in the biomimicry models, you know, like the mycorrhizal network it's a very important one, right? And where that gets properly fed and nourished, such that it can do its function, because it doesn't have a real name, a real something that people can latch onto easily and support. So yeah, I agree that the TRCC is a great model for that. At least they're trying to get in those gaps, but I think there's a lot of white space there. That's, you know, and I had mentioned ThreadSpan, but I could introduce you to Kirby too. But ThreadSpan is this gentleman by the name of Kevin Irby, who's doing food systems mapping in New York, in the Hudson River Valley.
Great. Yeah, it's great to be able to connect folks up. That'd be amazing. I'm sensing that it might be a good moment to wrap here towards the end of the hour, so that we can make that transition for folks. But maybe some closing, if there's any kind of closing thoughts or next action type thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the closing thoughts would just be I'm glad to have had participation from all of y'all, and again, it's been this exchange is extremely important and valuable, and to know what are some of the actual frameworks, design philosophies, all of these things that are driving some of these efforts, and where they're even happening. I would there are aspects that we didn't even cover, which has been this whole, how do you bring the urban centers in, or how do you distribute the different forms of capital that may be valid. The urban has financial capitals, usually more, but some of the other capital lacking. Food distribution in the network is a weak point. So I would like to have another session. I don't think we've got any more time for open space discussions. This is the last of it. But what Lauren, what you said was extremely important. Thinking about this is it's a challenge across the different systemic work that we're doing, whether it's food systems or others. This cross-pollination, exchange of information. So, in closing, just wanted to thank you all, and yeah, whatever last few thoughts, and then we're good to go.
Well, I really appreciate that you called this session and hosted it, and I look forward to, I trust that we'll keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Oh, and I just wanted to say, tomorrow I'm meeting with Charles on hubs, and I'm interested in building social hubs. And as part of that, I'd kind of like to include people who know about food and farming and all permaculture, try to seed those in the hubs as well.
I'll be at
just
that
to spread the
session.
word. Okay.
Yeah, Tahera, I don't know if you'd be able to make it to that session as well, but that's another way to cross-pollinate the conversations is another way to do it.
11 to 1, right? So yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, if you can make it. Yeah.
I'll be there.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.